I think that somebody who goes off in a monastery and starts praying for the salvation of mankind and doesn't do a damn thing but sits there and prays, I think that according to my conception of God, that when that guy comes up for judgment, that the judge is going to sit there and say, "Why, you cruddy bastard." You've got to get away from all of this reconciliation jazz and all this friendship and all that kind of business in this world. Reconciliation in this world means only one thing. When one side gets enough power so the other side gets reconciled to it, then you got reconciliation. Then you got peace and love, and then you got a dialogue going on.
Saul David Alinsky has been described as the man you invite into your city to bust up the joint. He is an apostle of power. He hires himself out to the poor and the oppressed. Operating out of a suitcase, he has been working his beat for 30 years.
There are things you want. It comes down very simply. Do you want them? If you want them, you have to go out and get them. If you want to go out and get them, there are only certain ways that you...
He instructs poor people in the arts of political protest and sends them out against the establishment to do battle for a better life. He has been called the wandering Jewish Robin Hood and a no-good son of a bitch. He has preached his uncompromising gospel to immigrants, wetbacks, and Canadian Indians.
As I told you before, this is the kind of thing that white society would love to see you do, because they know you're not going anywhere. And it means that they can go on doing what they want without being concerned about making any changes.
You don't
They'd
think
love to see all the
white
Negroes in America living on their reserves.
Well, you seem like a man who has no love or none of these feelings or anything, isn't sensitive.
I have a hell of a lot more love than you have, because I'm willing to go out and get corrupted for it. I'm willing to fight for it. I'm willing to stick my life on a line on it. And you're just willing to stick around and talk about love and hippies and not do a goddamn thing.
Yeah, but that's not true.
Much of his work today is in a more explosive environment. This is what the great Negro writer James Baldwin has called the howling North American wilderness. This is America in the 1960s. The marches, the sit-ins, and then rioting, destruction, and death. The Negroes of America have decided that 100 years after Abe Lincoln, they are still the slave of the white man.
So the brothers cried, "Freedom now." And they even tried to be nice about it. They cried, "Please, freedom now." But earlier in the 1960s, there emerged a new order on the stage. The order of black power. And that was the cry to effect change, those ills.
As a man who has been preaching power for years, Saul Alinsky, a white Jew, finds himself in the middle of the Black Revolution.
Change must come. So now, the call has been black power. This call erupted and shook every house, including the White House, from Watts to New York City, from New York to Mississippi, because one thing that it meant, that black folk were getting together for business. Now, I am for integration, but I am for integration when two equals meet and decide that it's necessary.
In the aftermath of race riots, American cities turned to Alinsky. This delegation from Dayton, Ohio, a city rocked by 3 nights of violence, is trying to decide whether they want Alinsky's particular brand of medicine.
Blessed are the poor. I don't know what the hell's blessed about them. I came out of a poor neighborhood. It's a most stinking mess. You just want to get away from it, if you can. And there's nothing about being poor, nothing about, and I'm sure I told you this before, about being discriminated against, being segregated and so forth. There's nothing in those things that endow you with any special qualities of nobility, justice, charity, or wisdom. To assume that an organizer goes into a community like a blank blotter and that it's the whole program that comes out just out of the people themselves is another romantic myth. If an organizer doesn't have any idea what to do about it, he hasn't got any damn business being in there. If I've got good organizers, I've got to pay them well. And furthermore, I want to pay them well because they have enough domestic tensions without the financial situation coming into it.
Alinsky's small band of 12 organizers are scattered across America, carrying the gospel into the various communities that call for help. First, the oppressed minority must be organized into a cohesive power bloc. Then it must isolate a specific enemy.
And putting the mayor on the spot. You'll have trouble flushing out this top leadership.
These organizers are mounting a campaign in Buffalo.
Mohawk. They'll probably hide behind their public relations and industrial relations departments. But it's important that your people understand what you're going into. It's going to be a long, hard battle. And what you're really waiting is for them to make their mistake, which in the Kodak case was when they tore up the agreement. No. The issue was over and settled.
You cut the issue, you freeze the target, and then you go to war.
There would have been no fight.
A good guy is somebody who is 100% behind you. A bad guy is anybody else.
Now, what do you think about shooting for a signed contract?
Sure.
A basic Alinsky tactic is to deal only with top management. If the enemy is City Hall, you get to see the mayor.
You're more comfortable, but I didn't expect so many persons. However, some of you can sit here at the table, and if we speak loud enough, why, all can hear what's going on.
This is obviously going to be a major battle,
An Alinsky organizer works behind the scenes. He gives his clients the benefit of his experience and expertise, but the people must do the fighting for themselves.
And there may be a representative like Charles and like with us, for yourself.
That's for, we can really start declaring war.
As of yesterday afternoon, late afternoon, my information and my contact with Mr. Light, who was handling the matter who was the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce, was that some 916 jobs appear to be available. That includes the 600 jobs that the county is making available.
Are these jobs of a temporary or permanent nature?
I haven't got the full specifics on them. Some of them will be permanent, some will be temporary, but efforts are being made.
Well, let me at this time, Mr. Mayor, make crystal clear Bill's position on this job matter. Bill's position is that we are concerned about permanent jobs, 3,500 permanent jobs with a take-home pay of $75, with a policy of hire now and train later.
Mr. Chuck Light of the Chamber of Commerce, who has been handling this phase of it, is here, as is Mr. Bob Bennett.
Mr. Mayor, we are appreciative of your hearing, but I reiterate, we will be more than happy to honor the invitation at 1 o'clock at the Chamber of Commerce with Mr. Light.
Mr. Light, are you and the Chamber willing to meet with Bill?
As I pointed out to Mr. Harmon yesterday...
The Alinsky operatives watch and advise very closely during these early stages of a new war. But once an organization is established, once it is fighting its own battles effectively, then the Alinsky men will pack up and move on.
We appreciate the hearing at this time, and we have stated our purpose in coming, and you've responded accordingly. And we thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The door is always open.
In Chicago, Alinsky's first Negro organization has been running its own show for 4 years. Their war against the slum is far from over. They fight on relentlessly, but without resort to physical violence.
Mr. Johnson, how are the rats annoyed you and your children, especially in the evening?
In the night, you mean in the afternoon? I mean, when dark begin to come.
Right.
They this long. They this long. They long as that thing you got there. Greasy, nasty, black, like they just come out the bottom part of the basement. Like they've been in grease or something like that. The hairs hang off them. It's greasy. They walk down the hole like cats.
Have any of the rats?
They big as a cat. They big as a cat. You can hear them walking down the hole. You get up and look and it's a big rat.
Have any of the rats ever bothered any of you and your children?
They got in the bed with my daughter. Got in the bed with them. Yeah. They big as a cat.
How many tenants in the building?
The building has, I think, something like 27 to 30 tenants.
27 to 30 tenants. Tell you what, why don't we turn out all 30 of them? Now, the other thing is this. Are we going to need babysitters? We're going to need babysitters.
I think we're going to need babysitters because if we're going to get all the tenants out, we're going to have somebody to take care of those kids while they're there because there's quite a few kids in that building.
All right. So that'll be three ploys we've got. Number one, we've got the demonstration in front of his home Sunday. Number two, we go with the building department. Number three, we pull a mass rent strike on all of the slum buildings he's got. I think he's got about 8.
What's this, ACT? This ACT organization? Are you in charge of this, sir?
Yes, I'm the director of the Woodlawn organization.
What's your name?
Leon Finney.
Leon what?
Finney, F-I-N-N-E-Y.
And what is this in regards to?
Pickett owns a building at 1501 to 17 East 64th Street. We've asked him, the tenants in the building, we've asked him to cooperate, make the necessary repairs. His name is Francis Pickett.
Pickett?
P-I-C-K-E-T.
And he lives here?
Yes.
All right, sir, as long as they don't block anybody and don't cause any disturbance, you won't have to hang on.
Okay. I think,
okay? Yeah.
All right.
The question is, when did these people file suit?
The question is that they want some action, man. They don't want no suits.
Well, look.
They want some heat. They want some janitorial services. They want.
It's very hot now.
Sure.
I mean, they want heat now?
Does it take heat to heat water? How do you get hot water?
Is there no hot? Do you live in this building?
How do you get hot water?
Who lives in the building?
How do you get hot water?
Turn the gas
Yeah, all right. Here's a tenant that's in the building.
Yes.
Now, why don't you address your questions to her?
Okay.
Rats, roaches, bathtub stopped up, stool stopped up, clean the face bowl stopped up, rats this long in the bed with the babies. I pays my rent. I don't promise it. I don't say I think I will pay you. I pays. I don't try to cheat my way through, but I ain't getting no service. We don't even see Pickett, period.
Yeah. Well, I think that the man that owns your building certainly has to clean up all these conditions. That's not what I'm arguing.
But you just soon not to have it in the neighborhood. Is that right?
I'm not
You'd
saying,
rather have it
no,
in the courts?
that's not what I'm saying.
Well, you seem to be basing most of your argument on moving the whole issue to the courts.
I'm taking issue with the fact that she hasn't exhausted available means.
The only thing I'm suggesting is this. That the remedy that you're talking about
Some of us have really been
is
to
too
court,
slow.
but he didn't ever show.
You've only filed 2 months ago by your own word.
How many babies have got to be bitten? How many roaches have got to crawl over people before you get some action?
File a suit against the guy.
About a year and a half ago, found myself in a confrontation with the Ku Klux Klan in Texas, and a large mass of them in a big auditorium. In the middle of my speech, I suddenly stopped, and I started staring at the Klan leader. And finally I said, as I look at the face of this leader of the Ku Klux Klan here, I say to you that he is a Negro. It was like a bomb went off in the place. All the Klansmen started turning around and looking at the face of their leader. And all of a sudden his nose started getting a little broader and his hair started getting... Once the idea is planted, you begin to associate. I knew what I had done. I knew that I'd ruined this man for life. I knew that he would spend the rest of his life trying to prove that he was white. If I had been told that after I did this to him, he would walk out of the auditorium, that there would be a meeting and the Klan would throw him out of leadership, and that he would then go home and commit suicide, I would have done it. Do I make myself clear?
The delegation from Dayton has listened to Alinsky for 10 days. He leaves them now to make their decision.
Doesn't someone have to say, are there other alternatives, or are there any other directions beside this that are maybe more valid or more up to date? I don't know. So that do we want to commit ourselves to this phrase, Alinsky type of organization, when we don't know, one, what we mean by Alinsky type organization, or maybe we don't agree. I mean, we have a general feeling, but how far we mean this. And second, is this the only model?
But at this point, with 2 weeks of exposure to the Alinsky philosophy, are we going to go and set up another institute for exposure to another philosophy?
When we go back to Dayton, are we going to try to sell community organization or Saul Alinsky?
He's not for sale,
Yeah.
He's not bargaining to organize. Now, and he's also said that there is no organizer in our community at present. We're going to have to import one, because if there was one, we'd already have an organization.
We know we've been indoctrinated by Alinsky, and yet seem like we are so timid and afraid to let people know that we've been in a meeting with him.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's asinine to pretend otherwise.
Yes, and we must admit that he's helped us.
You're darn right he has.
Right. Very good.
Like 3 cheers for Alinsky.
Yeah.
That conception I have of the world is sort of as mankind sort of going up a mountain.
Alinsky talks with members of the Company of Young Canadians.
And on that summit, by the time he gets up there, he's got to go over all kinds of obstacles on war and prejudice and famine, unemployment, all the things we regard as evil.
See, one of the, I don't want to get into a long philosophical discussion, but you're giving a 19th century notion of progress, and progress is a mighty hard, long road to hoe. And, in terms of your example about the mountain, that there's this summit that man's got to get to,
No.
that, he's got to go through all these struggles to get there. There's a group of people now who talk about abolishing the mountain. The important thing is that social change means changing the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's what social change is. That it's not a unilinear line that always reaches for the summit of the mountain.
You've got to believe he's going to get up there, because if I don't, what the hell am I crapping
I believe he's
for?
going to destroy the mountain, and that whole struggle won't even be meaningful. I don't seek to keep sending people up the mountain, and blowing the mountain is not copping out.
It's not copping out?
No.
Where the hell are you blowing it? You're organizing the poor for what? To participate in these decadent, decayed, degenerate, bourgeois values. Well, when I talk to the poor, when they ask me to work with them, you know what they want? They want a bigger, fatter piece of these decadent, degenerate, bourgeois values. All right, this may be wrong, but this is
Of course they want that. That's what the media's taught them to want. That's what the whole socialization process is about. Of course.
All right, you want to go organize them on other values that you have decided are better values for them?
I think there's someone here who works with a group of people who are operating on different values.
You mean the hippies?
The hippies are the first ones who try and live in a new value system. They're the first ones who actively deal with the problem of utopia. They don't have to write about it. They don't have to think about it. They try and live it. They try and live their lives as they want them to be in a new society.
Look, you've had hippies from the time the world began. At one point, the desert was so goddamn crowded with hippies during the early days of Christianity that people started climbing, went back to the cities and started climbing up to mountain cabins to get away and to live their kind of life. You think this kind of withdrawal and this kind of, all right, I will go live my life, I'll live it in Haight-Ashbury, or I'll become a Trappist monk and I'll live it over here?
But one of the major theories of social change is that you build up counter-institutions to what is, and that a new society emerges.
All right,
how the hell did Christianity develop? What's the development of capitalism? It's the same thing.
You don't have a tougher, harder, more realistic operator than Paul in organizing Christianity. If Paul hadn't come around to organize a Christian church, Christ would have been another guy hanging on a cross.
There's always the organizers. I'm not saying there isn't the organizers.
He was the guy who
But I'm saying there's a different set of values that grow up alongside another.
When you start organizing, and you start organizing like a guy like Paul, and you can see his reports coming in from his organizers. They call them missionaries. I got a bunch signed up here. They're all ready to buy it, but they don't want to be circumcised. They say it hurts. Skip the circumcision. I got another group over here. They're all ready to come in, but they don't want to give up lobster and seafood and so forth, which is against the Mosaic law. The hell with that. Drop that out. Sign them, and you can see this guy organizing and dealing all over the place. As long as you are not organized, you will never have power, which is, I repeat, the ability to act. Don't look at power in an invidious context with all of the emotional sordidness of conspiracy and negativism and corruption and so forth that most people associate with it. It's simply the ability to act. It's my heart pumping, the power in my heart to keep me alive. It's actually the life force itself. As long as you don't organize to have that power, you can have 1% of the people of this world, let's say the bastards, organized, and all the rest of the world hippie, and that 1% is going to run the whole damn world.
The Negro has come into our...
Alinsky has many critics in high places. Dr. Philip Hauser is a leading sociologist at the University of Chicago.
The Alinsky technique, in effect, assumes that if the Negro organizes through an exercise of power, he can achieve his birthright in the United States. I only wish that this were true. In effect, what he says is there are good guys and bad guys. The bad guys have subordinated and oppressed the good guys, equated to the poor and the underprivileged, and that the only hope that the poor and the underprivileged have of rising in the economic and social scale and throwing off the shackles of oppression and subordination and the like is through revolt, that is through the use of power. Now, in my judgment, the Alinsky approach is a relatively simplistic and naive one for a good many situations. That is, he uses essentially the approach of labor organization as it was operative at the beginning of this century. You organize a community by giving them some common enemies, having them hate the enemies, and around the emotion of conflict, produce an organization that then through an exercise of power in conflict would accomplish its objectives. First of all, it is obviously absurd to assume that a 10 and is now 11% of our population can achieve its objectives against the will of an 89 or 90% of the population through use of power or force. This, on the face of it, is an absurd proposition. Black power, if it wishes to resort to force, can certainly harass society. They can set up forms of guerrilla warfare of the type that are now manifest in various parts. But the reaction that might produce in the way of the organization of the 90% majority could lead to simply oppression, suppression, if you please, even concentration camps and the like. This is not going to achieve any objectives. It's an absurd proposition.
I have no point in getting into any name calling here, but Hauser basically suffers from utter political illiteracy. He's never been involved in the arena of conflict and of people. I don't know if any revolutions had more than 2% organized minority.
So much for Alinsky in theory. Here is Alinsky in practice. One more in chapter and verse. It begins on a July night in 1964 in upstate New York. The comfortable city of Rochester, with its excellent record of civic good deeds, prepares to sleep the sleep of the just. Suddenly, windows begin to break, voices begin to roar, guns begin to fire. Rochester, of all places, is having a race riot. When it is over, 3 are dead, hundreds wounded. There's $1.5 million damage. Negro and white church groups decide they need outside help. They consider hiring the controversial services of Saul Alinsky. There is a civic uproar, but the church group stands firm and decides to go with Alinsky.
The moment I even look at a community, the establishment promptly reacts in fear, shock, and hate. Since the have-not community sees this reaction, immediately they assume they haven't seen anybody so shake up the establishment. This is what the establishment fears above everything else. It must, ipso facto, be good and be what they want. The fact that they buy a good deal of the mythology that this guy is sort of a demigod or a Superman and always wins his fights, etc., is extremely important too, because remember, here's a people that are starting believing that there isn't anything they can do about anything. They're almost beaten.
And what does Alinsky think of Rochester, New York?
Affluence, opulence, sheer material security, and sheer smugness and arrogance.
Many Christians are bitter and angry at the presence of Alinsky. There's a sharp drop in church attendance.
The church is guilty of all sorts of fallacies and fumblings, but it has its gospel, and where it can see a place to proclaim its gospel, it has to do it, even admitting that we don't have very great ethical and moral standards to speak from. In other words, our ethical and moral purity has nothing to do with the question of what we say. We are proclaiming a gospel which is separate and independent of our own integrity, goodness, peace, and so forth.
Creating tensions. What tensions have we created? We haven't even come into the community. I've only been in Rochester for 5 hours, and all of a sudden there are tensions around. Well, I'll tell you, you do have tensions, but you refuse to look at them. What is happening now is that as a consequence of this invitation, a hidden infection is being brought out into the open.
Alinsky sends in Ed Chambers, his top organizer. Chambers works quickly to head off another long, hot summer. By June 1965, he has brought 125 different organizations into the same meeting hall. 1,000 delegates elect a single leader, an obscure militant Negro minister, Franklin Delano Roosevelt Florence.
Everybody understands what white power is because they own the banks. They have all the commercial power in the community. But they only have it at the expense of that black brother that's deaf, dumb, and blind. And the only way black power can end the slums, desegregate, and strengthen black schools, the only way that can be done is through black power.
And you spell black power in Rochester with capital letters, F-I-G-H-T.
F-I-G-H-T. Freedom, independence, God, honor, today. The Fight organization is born.
We are no longer begging. It's the day of demand. It's now or never.
During the first year, Fight declares war on City Hall, social agencies, and the press at large. It wins small victories in the areas of housing and education. In the second year, Fight decides to go to war against Negro unemployment. And so the issue is cut, the target is frozen. It is a formidable target. It is Eastman Kodak, largest film manufacturer in the world, biggest employer in Rochester. Although Kodak has no labor union, it has an excellent reputation for benevolence towards its employees. It supported President Kennedy's plan to provide jobs for minority groups. Alinsky doesn't think Kodak lived up to its pledge. Fewer than 3% of its employees are Negro. Kodak's spokesman is Kenneth Howard.
Well, you have to recognize, you see, an organization like Fight it's essentially, I think you'd have to describe it as a protest organization. It's entirely different frame of reference than a private corporation has. One of the problems has been for them to recognize the limitations under which we operate, which are many. Our responsibilities to government, to stockholders, to employees, to the public in general, to the many, many thousands of people who come to Kodak and apply for jobs on their own initiative every year.
The issue that we are cutting and which Eastman Kodak's allies have cut as to whether or not a corporation has a responsibility to the local community as well as to its stockholders, whether it has a social responsibility outside of a financial responsibility, has to be resolved. And we propose to resolve it. We believe that a corporation in this world as it stands today, and so do you, believes that it has a social responsibility.
After months of negotiation, Kodak representatives agree to Fight's demand that they hire 600 untrained Negroes. 3 days later, Kodak management repudiates the agreement.
Mr. Alinsky, how about the present problem with Eastman Kodak? What kind of stance are you taking here?
We're taking a very similar stance. We're taking the same stance that every civilized nation took with Hitler. When an agreement is signed, we expect it to be honored. We went through this period of the Nazis signing of a non-aggression pact on Monday and then invading on Tuesday. And when Eastman Kodak arrogates unto itself a unilateral authority of whether or not they will honor a contract or not, we're just not going to stand for that. Now, at this point, the issue is cut nationally, and as I understand, is also getting international attention, whereby the churches and many of the leading citizens in this country are for the first time using their stock holdings in Eastman, the forthcoming stockholders meeting in Flemington, New Jersey on Tuesday.
Fight decides to make a national issue of the Kodak case. They buy 10 shares of Kodak stock and invite the nation's press, radio, and television to sit in on the annual stockholders meeting. Here are the events of that April day, 1967, as reported by TV station WHEC.
This is Warren DeRemus reporting from Flemington, New Jersey.
This was the scene of the public confrontation between the Negro organization Fight, which purports to speak for Rochester's black community, and the world's premier film manufacturer, Eastman Kodak Company. These are the grounds of Hunterton Central High School, about a mile from downtown Flemington, a little community of 3,000 here in southwest New Jersey, which hasn't been invaded by so many newsmen and others since the Lindbergh trial in the early 30s. This was the scene on the main street of Flemington. Teeming with members of the Fight organization and its supporters, the street also, as you see, was filled with New Jersey State Police. The picketers were moving directly in front of the corporate headquarters of Eastman Kodak Company. That headquarters is located in a real estate office here on the main street. The school auditorium was packed to capacity by Kodak shareholders as the annual meeting began. The showdown over that disputed agreement between Fight and Kodak on a job referral plan was only seconds away as board chairman William Vaughn, who presided over the meeting, had just begun to speak when Minister Florence interrupted him, calling for a point of order. As shouts of "Get him out of here" came from the audience of stockholders, Florence demanded, "Will you honor the agreement?" Getting no response from Vaughn, he yelled, "We will give you until 2 p.m. We will be waiting outside for your decision." Amid more shouts of "Get him out of here" and boos mixed with some applause, Florence and friends stormed out of the meeting hall. Chairman Vaughn then said, "I think we can now proceed," and heavy applause answered him. The meeting went on for another hour, and afterwards Chairman Vaughn, still totally composed, agreed to talk with newsmen.
Mr. Vaughn, while you were on the stage, Minister Florence and Saul Alinsky were outside saying they were going to declare war on Eastman Kodak Company, and now the ante was upped from 600 to 2,000 jobs. What's your response to that?
Well, it's not the first time we've heard the term war used. From that source, Minister Florence used it first back in October of 1966. Mr. Alinsky was here, was he? I heard that he probably would be here today, but I wasn't sure.
Eastman Kodak will probably, in that blind stupidity that's been so characteristic of their position from the very beginning.
And so the showdown at Flemington has become history. Fight delivered its ultimatum, but Kodak stood its ground. Fight demanded that Kodak honor an agreement, and Kodak called for cooperation. Fight declared war, and Kodak promised an honest job. Nothing was settled here.
It now becomes a war, and it'll be a war that will be cut in Eastman Kodak's arena.
It's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong. But that's white power. And that's oppressive power. The kind of power that do not believe to respect a man because he is a man, and try to punish him because of the pigmentation of his skin, which he had nothing to do with.
Alinsky decides on a new tactic. A substantial portion of Kodak stock is in the hands of labor unions, charitable foundations, church groups. Alinsky will tour the country trying to convince these organizations to turn over their proxy vote to Fight. Armed with these proxies, Fight will have the necessary leverage to affect Kodak policy. He carries his fight to university campuses. He promotes his campaign against Kodak in a speech to the graduating class of the Episcopal Theological School in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Saul David Alinsky.
Let me begin by not going into a repetition of the goals of what we want and the kind of world that we want with all of these phrases that you have used so frequently, where every individual can achieve his potentialities and that and this and so forth and so on. You know, the dignity of the individual and all the rest of the stuff that you do every Sunday. Let us take this for granted. Let us assume that some of the meaning of what you talk about you do grasp, which at times I have a good deal of reservation about. I've taken the position that you can keep your sermons, but give us your stock options, you know. But right here is where you are getting a strong division, wherein many are taking the position within the churches that it is one thing for us to take a moral position behind Fight, which is the name of the organization in Rochester, the ghetto organization, to take a moral position and say we are in support of their position, but to use our stock investments, our financial investments, in this kind of a battle, this is most unseemly and it's against precedent. Well, everything from now on is going to be against precedent. Let me suggest that if you get involved in action, you have to act. I have an idea that if you come into the action, you are going to find your mission. Here we have been attacking, for example, the church for its materialistic roots, its big financial investments in the establishments, etc. I think, ironically, that if you give us your stock proxies, for example, that your stock proxies would be your Christian soldiers. Just the opposite. Your materialistic investments would be carrying out more of a spiritual duty than you're doing in your sermons. You've been scared to death to take action. You've been paying me off to do the action for you. That's what it comes down to. When I was talking to those Protestants yesterday, those Episcopalians, and I said, you know what you're doing? You're paying me off to do your job. You remember that?
They applauded, but I'm not sure
why. They were embarrassed
why.
as hell. I don't know why they applauded. I think it was their own guilt. If there ever was a guilt applause, it was that.
Father Joseph Fichter, a Jesuit sociologist.
The issues are very simple. It becomes a contest of power. Now, power has always gone into two areas, those who have money and those who have people. We have nothing but people. But the politicians understand this. So therefore, each time that we move on this, every time the Episcopalians come out with proxies, the Presbyterians, the Methodists, and all the rest of them, and you Roman Catholics and the Jews, etc., this means that there's going to be a sharp political sensitivity, if I may use that phrase, in terms of supporting us on this issue. And it's here that we are going to beat Eastman Kodak.
Alinsky has high hopes. For 30 years, he has been financed principally by the Christian Church. He has many friends in the clergy, men like Presbyterian minister John Fry of Chicago.
I'm going to try to open up an organization which will be for all of the liberals of America, where they can deposit and send all their proxies and all their stock holdings. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I got it.
So we can have them all on file in the regular office staff and the regular board that decides on issues, and then can just pull out immediately how many proxies it has and go to war in that particular area. As a matter of fact, I'm going to write an article for Harper's on this thing in the next couple of months. Now, I hope that once this starts, that the churches will follow through with their own interdenominational business. See, the hang-up I run into with the churches, for one thing, is a lot of the churches don't want to come out and tell me how much dough they've got, how much stock investments they got. It makes them look like, you know, big fat cats, and they don't want...
Which they are.
Well, yeah, but it's bad for their public image. But between themselves, they're willing to talk about it.
Besides being out of their experience, I think the church community is really hung up in the 20th century on the role of conflict in Christianity. I think the present day church, or leaders of the church, feel that conflict has no part in religion. And I think the issue that Fight has projected, it's either going to make the church play its role properly or be exposed to the world for what it is today.
But it is no good. There is only fragmentary support from the unions, the foundations, the churches. They are unwilling to surrender carte blanche control of their voting stock. Alinsky and Florence make a last pitch to the National Council of Churches, largest interdenominational group in the U.S. It doesn't work.
They question the efficacy of the tactic of the stock option as to whether it would work, whether there was enough stock outside of the hands of Eastman Kodak and so forth in the general public. And our position all the way through was, look, we know there's no such thing as a perfect tactic. And we also explained some of what's behind this tactic.
Yeah. The fact is, they didn't want to do anything. And apparently, they didn't want us to do anything. If I had closed my eyes, if I really closed my eyes, I would have thought for a moment I was talking to Allers of Kodak, or Vaughn of Kodak. It's the same mentality.
It's what I would call a case of constipated Christianity.
What's that?
It means no action. That's what Minister Florence said. Nothing's passing through, you know. It's just all clogged up and sermons and in resolutions and in moral pronouncements.
See what love the Father has given us, that we should be called the children of God, and so we are. Let us then pray for this child and join then together in the prayer of our Lord Jesus Christ. The blessing of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit rest upon and be with you always. Amen.
An elder in this church is Bill Claytor, a Negro.
We've been sitting down at tables discussing these problems for many, many years. Rochesters were quite proud of the fact that it's been sitting down at tables and discussing it for many, many years, and yet can turn right around and look back in the 7th and 3rd Ward and see the same problems still exist.
But in our church here, which has people who are like you as members, there are people who say, well, look at Bill Claytor. He made it without the help of Saul Alinsky and all this. Aren't you living proof that community organization is not needed, that the individual motivation is more important?
I think I would say that I'm the exception to the rule in one way. In another way, I think people never understand that there are classes within the Negro society, just like there are classes within the white society.
The church has an ideal to stand for, even if it is unrealistic, the integrated society. And it seems to me that when they begin to stand, well, let's make the ghetto all black and as good as it can be, that, it seems to me, is where the church has to part company and say no.
Dave, you just said a minute ago something about parting company with Mr. Alinsky. Now, are you parting company because of an assumption, or has Mr. Alinsky come out definitely was a certain form of statement which a church cannot adhere to?
I think in the Rochester community, and having gone through what we have gone through, we are finished with Alinsky. Alinsky has pushed as far as Alinsky could go.
Alinsky doesn't think so. He reopens direct negotiation with Kodak. It is the violent summer of 1967. Detroit will become a city under siege and 43 persons will die. 26 will die in Newark, and in 63 other American cities there will be riots. Minister Florence has warned Rochester to prepare for violence. He and the Fight organization wait impatiently for Alinsky's report on his last-ditch negotiations with Kodak.
He got back to me on Tuesday and told me that Eastman Kodak flatly turned it down. They'd have no part of me. They wouldn't meet with me, etc., meaning also Fight as well. So I said, all right, I'll tell you what you do. You tell them that that's the last time I'm going to issue an invitation. You tell them that I'm meeting with my staff and with the Fight leaders on Friday at noon. That's the last Friday. And that at that point, once I give the word to go, we're off. There will be no turning back because the situation will also go out of my hands as various senators start moving in on it for their own political purposes, etc. It becomes more than just a battle between Eastman Kodak and ourselves and churches, etc. You tell them that the next time I will meet, they will come. They'll come into Governor Rockefeller's office, and they'll sign. You tell them that the next time we meet, we'll meet in front of the United States Senate in the hearings room, and they'll come there because they won't get an invitation. They'll be coming in response to a subpoena.
June 23rd, 1967. Alinsky arrives once again at Rochester's Monroe County Airport. It has been 3 long years, and this is the day of decision. Downtown at Kodak headquarters, negotiating teams go out to meet the press. There have been many concessions, much watering down of demands, but Kodak has finally recognized Fight. There's a tacit agreement on jobs, and the two belligerent powers meet not head-on with bullets and blood in the streets, but at a press conference.
Hurry up, Bernie.
Ready to roll, everybody?
Let's go, Bernie. Drop it.
You rolling?
Representatives of FITE and Kodak have held a number of discussions recently, and I am pleased to announce that this morning, Dr. Eilers, who is unfortunately out of town, has sent a telegram to Minister Florence, president of the FITE organization, which I would like to read. Recently, representatives of FITE and of Kodak have held a number of conversations seeking a common ground for cooperative action on community problems. This telegram is intended to recognize the merit of these discussions and to review some of the ways in which Kodak and FITE can work together. As a result of these meetings, there now appears to be an opportunity to create better understanding and to work in mutual respect. Kodak recognizes that FITE, as a broad-based community organization, speaks in behalf of the basic needs and aspirations of the Negro poor in the Rochester area. Kodak, too, desires to help create a better community. It was suggested that FITE and Kodak establish a relationship under which Kodak would send employment interviewers into selected places in inner-city neighborhoods in cooperation with FITE. And it's signed Dr. L.K. Eilers, President.
Gentlemen, can we ask you if this puts an end to what has been called the big battle between Kodak and FITE, or are there other things that remain to be resolved? For instance, a signed agreement, which you have insisted upon all along, Minister Florence.
Mr. Howard can answer that.
Well, I think we have here the basis of developing a new relationship between FITE and Kodak. Minister Florence has received a telegram signed by Dr. Eilers, and on this basis, we hope to develop a new relationship.
What do you have to say to that, Mr. Florence?
Well, Mr. Eilers has sent a telegram.
You consider that enough of a signature?
That's the president of Kodak.
So you feel you've got a signed agreement?
That's the president of Kodak.
It would appear both have won a victory. Kodak by gaining a truce with FITE, while FITE has gained 6 months of national publicity by tackling one of the largest industries in America. While the community, which stands to win or lose the most, can take some satisfaction in knowing a war is over, and both sides say they have agreed to cooperate. Arriving in Rochester this afternoon by plane from Chicago was Saul David Alinsky, the guiding light of FITE. He told TV 10 News of his reaction to the Kodak-FITE agreement.
This is not the kind of war that ended up in a victory that was anything else but a joint victory, actually. Both sides won, which was very unusual. Kodak came out from I'd say a feudal mentality of benevolent paternalism to recognize and to negotiate. And both sides here should be congratulated, both FITE and Eastman Kodak.
Do you think this will have any effect on the long, hot summer that was promised in that letter from Minister Florence to Kodak?
I think it will have a tremendous effect.
Alinsky has done what he came here to do. As soon as the Negroes rose to their positions on the issues, and the whites rose to their positions, and there was some dialogue and some results, and the fever went from 100 to 105, then Alinsky has done what he came here to do, and there are some people that are grateful that he's leaving. And I think Alinsky would say, I've accomplished what I came here to do.
We have upset a great many people, and we have as much of a pastoral concern for them as for the lowest deprived Negro in the community. And if the church sits back and says, now we've shaken everything up, wasn't that fun? We will have really not fulfilled the mission of our Lord. We have a tremendous piece of work to do in trying to understand the anxieties and concerns of the people who are part of our own local churches and who are not at all convinced that FITE and Alinsky did anything good.
We have a deal for jobs. We have a new relationship. We have understanding. And you know, I just have to say it. We have an agreement. You know, before this can really be a deal, before it can really be what it ought to be, this convention must ratify that agreement. Just here, I would entertain a motion for the adoption of the Fight Kodak agreement you have just heard read before you. It's been properly moved, and do I hear a second? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, just left.
If I were Minister Florence, he's done such a tremendous job, he should be now the Saul Alinsky of the black man in America. This man has done the job.
Saul Alinsky will fly out in the morning, carrying his crude, abrasive energies to Oakland, to Dayton, to Buffalo, to wherever his good guys are fighting their bad guys.